Hey guys, welcome to another video. and today we're going to talk about something so unusual as top 12, not top 10, not top 5, but top 12. um, Top 12 speaker brands between 1950 and 1970. I have not included, that means I have not included what came out in 1970. So it's more or less like 1950 to about end of 1969. The top 12 brands and speaker models and speaker companies that was on the market at that time period. My list is not in a ranking order. I have not ranked them like from 12 to 1 or whatever. So it's just a random order that I'm taking them in. Doesn't mean that the one that I speak about the last is number 1 or anything like that. But yeah, this is an interesting list. And it is the reason I started in this era between 1950 and let's say 69, 70s, right there, is because that was a period of time where speaker technology and speaker configuration really took leaps and bounds and set up what was coming out in 1970s and 80s and 90s and today. There will be another list that will be like 1970 to 1990. It's coming later. So this list that I have made based on my experience with speakers, and in the last 35 years I have been fortunate and blessed with the opportunity to listen to all of these and many of their models that they came out with, because all these manufacturers and brands had more than just one brand or one speaker or one model on the market. And I have been so blessed to hear all of them and most of them. There's maybe like a few models from certain manufacturers that I haven't heard, but I have dipped my toes into all of these. and that's why they are on the list. And they also they're on the list because they have a significant meaning and they have had such a presence on the history of sound and speakers in general. So let's just jump straight into it. The first one that I want to talk about, I'm not going to go in way too deep on each brand. If I do that, it's going to take 12 hours because I could basically do a video where I spend 2 hours on each freaking brand. So I'm just going to give you the brands, and I really recommend that you start Googling this if you are interested in finding out more about them, because most of these has a lot of information online. So that's the good thing about it. Let's start with a brand that maybe most people don't see as a top 12 brand, but they still had a presence in that era. Where they had some significant and they had some good sales, and that is Bose. And Bose is a very, very good speaker brand, and it was a good speaker company. They had some controversy and they went through some struggles like most other company did, but they had some really, really good speaker models and speaker configurations. They had some grand ones, they had some smaller ones. So they had a lot of different speakers and different models on the market, and they sold quite a bit back in the day. So Bose is, if you're looking for the vintage sound and you don't want to break your wallet or your budget, because a lot of these speakers that I'm going to mention have a huge price tag tagging along with them. Bose is maybe one of the more affordable ones. Depending on the model, of course, they have some models that can fetch a good price and has a demanding price tag up there, but most of the models are quite affordable. The next one on my list is Fraser, also a brand that most people probably wouldn't assume would be on a list like this, but I feel that they have so much good speakers, especially the later part of this period, late 60s. And they are a brand that kind of like have snuck under most people's awareness. And they kind of like fly by, under the radar kind of brand. But if you can find them, they're not easy to find. But if you can find a pair of Fraser speakers and you're looking for that vintage vibe and the vintage feel and the vintage sound and speakers that sounds good, look for them and try them out. They are fairly good. That's why they are on the list. And again, they are also on the more affordable side of things. They don't tag along a huge price tag because most people don't know what they have when they have a pair of Frasers. So if they sell it, they're not going to ask too much for them. So it's a very, very affordable way to get into vintage sound without paying an arm and a leg. The next one I want to talk about is Wharfedale. Wharfedale is also a brand that has a lot of good history, and they also have a lot of broken history. They have a lot of things that happened. They got sold, they got licensed out, they got licensed out again, and they have gone through a lot of difficult things. But that's in the later days, like 80s, 90s, and most recently. Back in the day, in this period, they were a stable company, they were a solid company, and they made awesome products. They made some awesome sounding speakers. If you have never heard vintage Wharfedale speakers, I really urge you to do so. They have that typical British vintage sound, very enjoyable. Of course, I'm not talking now about what the pros and cons are of the speakers, but compared to others, but more like a general thing. And in general, Wharfedale was a very good company who put out some really, really good products. And they also have had that typical influence on the market for later years, because they were one of the, at least in Europe, they were one of the bigger, most influential brands in that time era, especially in the later part of it. So until they kind of like got broken up and things went down the wrong tube and stuff like that, they had a good run for like 10, 15 years. They had a very good run. So absolutely a brand you should look at. They kind of are more on the collector's radar than both Bozak and Fraser. So you probably would have to pay a little bit more for Wharfedale, but they're still in the more affordable range, not like the other ones. So still again a good choice if you want to get into the vintage sound. And the common thing for most Wharfedale models that was out there, they also paid a lot of attention to details and design, so you get some good looking speakers as well. The next one I want to touch on is another British brand, and these have been on the market for many, many decades. They started back in the 20s, and it's Tannoy, and these are on the on the higher end of the price tag spectrum. So if you're looking to buy some vintage Tannoy speakers, be prepared to pay quite a bit. And for a good reason. They have some really good looking speakers. They have some really good solid manufactured speakers. The build quality has always been top notch, and the sound quality has always been among the best. Depending on which Tannoy speaker you go with, because they also had a big range and a large range of different models, from the more medium-sized up to the huge, huge ones that weighs 500-600 pounds or more. So if you're looking for some of the absolute best sounding speakers, you might want to look into Tannoy. I have had a blast every time I've listened to Tannoy speakers, and I have to be so honest and say that when it comes to pure sound quality, it is way up there on my list among the best. So Tannoy, if you can afford it and you have it in your budget, yeah, take a look for it and go out and hunt them down, because you will not be disappointed. And they had Tannoy was one of those companies who started out with, they did a lot of studio monitors and what they called back then commercial and pro speakers. But over the years, they kind of ventured in because it was a normal path for them to take after they got into the studio things and the monitoring things, that they went and ventured into the hi-fi section. So they had a big hand in how to shape the market for audio and speakers many decades to come after them. They're still on the market today. They're still operating. They're no longer based in England or Scotland. They are now, their head office is now in Singapore or something like that, and they're being owned by the same company who owns Behringer and a couple of other brands. But they still have a focus on design, grand design, and grand sound. So they haven't suffered anything in the sound quality range or anything like that. So another brand that I want, another company that I want to talk about, that was started up in the 50s. If I'm not mistaken, it was either 54 or 57, something like that. It's Quad. And they came onto the market in the mid 50s, and they released some of their ESL, the electrostat speakers, and they were quickly absorbed by the market among audiophiles back then, or hi-fi enthusiasts back then, as some of the clearest sounding speakers. And they got quite a bit of a following fast. So if you're looking for some really good speakers, the thing with electrostats are they tend to be lacking a little bit in the lower frequency area. So if you get some of the ESL from Quad from the 50s and up through the 60s, and some of the other speakers they have, try and pair them up with some mid-sized, subtle, good quality subwoofers. It will improve the sound even more. And trust me, Quad, just the way they are excellent sounding, but they're lacking a little bit. So if you can add a little subwoofer or something, that would help it out a lot, and you will get a much more complete sound. But Quad sound, you can't go wrong. They're harder to find, and when you find them, be prepared to pay quite a bit of a good money for them. It will empty your bank account pretty fast. So that's a good company, and they were kind of like the pioneers behind electrostats, and they kind of like they paved the future for other brands to come in later on. And if you're looking for some of the best, Quad is absolutely a brand you should look into. The next one that I want to talk about is Electrovoice. And Electrovoice has, for many years, for decades even, been one of my favorite speaker brands, both when it comes to pro audio and hi-fi. They don't make too much hi-fi these days. It's many years ago since they made their last hi-fi speakers. But back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s are not included in this list, they made some killer stuff when it came to hi-fi speakers. And they had a really good feel with it because they made everything themselves. They made the drivers, they made the cabinets, everything was in-house. And they had a very good control of things, and the build quality was top-notch, like it is today in their pro audio lineup today. And they had also a wider range of products. They didn't only do speakers, they did microphones, they did amplifiers, they did noise cancellation things. They did a lot of things back in the day, and they really paved the way for many companies to come after them, even though they are still on the market today. So if you can find Electrovoice speakers, vintage ones, I say jump on them. The price can be a little bit pricey and on the higher end of things, but it depends on the model. You can be lucky and find some good Electrovoice speakers that are affordable, and then you find someone that is like not affordable but not like outrageous high, and then of course you get the bigger models that are really hard to find. And trust me, the people who owns them or have them, they know what these are worth, and they're being sold for quite a penny. So Electrovoice is absolutely a brand if you're looking into vintage speakers. If you're not a big fan of the British sound, you want more the American sound, that can be either East Coast type of sound or West Coast sound, because there's a difference there too. There were some regional things. A few brands was called like the East Coast sound, and they had like this their own little sound character, and then you had the companies on the West Coast who kind of had a different type of sound character. Electrovoice was located in the Midwest. They kind of had a blend of both. They had some models that was like more leaning towards the East Coast sound, and then they had some models that was just full out blown, a mix of both. And the West, what if you ask what is the difference? Well, to put it easily and simple, the West Coast sound was focusing more on getting a fuller sound with more bass in it. The East Coast sound were kind of like more streamlined, not as bass heavy, not as powerful. It was more like that kind of line of things. So Electrovoice is absolutely a brand you should be looking for when we're talking about 50s and 60s, because they made some killer stuff. The next one, and now I don't want to take a lot of hit for this one, among audiophiles and others, but I want to put Serene Vega into this mix, and here's the reason why. I know Serene Vega has taken a lot of hits and a lot of criticism from critics in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and today, because they kind of went in a direction where they wanted to build big speakers with a big sound, and a lot of people didn't like that. But if we go back to the 50s, where Serene Vega had some of the best hi-fi speakers on the market, they had the Vega 100, the 200, the 300, the 400, the 500 corner horns, and they were kind of like battling it out with Klipsch and Altec and stuff like that. So they were kind of like on the rise, because Serene Vega slowly started in a garage in '48, didn't become a full-blown company until the early '50s. Got a really big bang out market share and on the market in '54, and between 1954 and '59, Serene Vega made the Vega series, Vega 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. They also made some the very first 250 watt solid state amplifier. They had reel to reels. They had a lot of stuff going on in the 50s that most people do not know about. And I can tell you that the corner horns that they made and the Fat Boy cabinets that they made back in the 50s was amazing sounding. They made their own woofers, but they also used mids and tweeters and horns from Jensen. So if you can get the Serene Vegas from 1950s, it is a mix of Serene Vega and Jensen products. They also used a few other brands, but mostly and most of the time it was Jensen. So in the 1950s, you could get some really killer good stuff from Serene Vega. They are extremely hard to find. You barely see them. If you see them, it is Vega 400 or 500. The smaller ones are extremely hard to find. And if you want to buy a pair of, or one or a pair, because I'm going to come back to this later on. If you want to buy some of these old Serene Vega stuff, yeah, they are high priced. The last pair that I saw that sold of the Vega 500, it was a pair. You have to remember that back in the 50s, these were sold as singles because it was still mono. But I saw a pair for sale, and they went for $4,800 for the pair. So be prepared to pay quite a bit of money for it. But if you want to explore the early days of Serene Vega, I have no problem recommending it, and they are way better than most other things today. And that's common for most things, but the Vega series from the 50s, absolutely go for it. The thing was with Serene Vega that when things started to change in the hi-fi market in 59 and 1960, Serene Vega pulled out of the hi-fi market. They didn't make any hi-fi products in the 1960s as a decade. All they did in the 1960s, from 1960 to 1969, was building pro audio speakers for musicians. And they teamed up with bands like Uriah Heep. They had Rolling Stones on their thing. They turned down they turned down artists like Paul McCartney and stuff like that. So they did a lot of sound for the pro audio business, because they kind of like, there was some things that happened in the late 50s that a lot of companies didn't adapt to, and they really struggled. Serene Vega saw it coming, they pulled out, and they went strictly full-blown into pro audio. But they returned to the hi-fi scene in the 1970s. Now, the next one I want to talk to you guys about is Klipsch. Most of you guys will probably say, well, you're not a Klipsch fan, so how can you have Klipsch on your list of the 12 best between 1950 and 1969? Well, it's not that I'm not a Klipsch fan. I have on purpose made a few videos about Klipsch Heresy, how I think they are tragic sounding speakers. I've done some videos on the KG, different KG models, and how I didn't like them. But there's a thing here. Klipsch corner horns, La Scala, and a few others, Cornwall, the La Belle or Bell or whatever they're called, they are really, really nice sounding Klipsch speakers. So there's a handful of Klipsch speakers that I highly regard as really good. And because of that, they are on my list. And they also had a huge influence on speaker technology and implementing speakers to homes. Because you have to remember that back in the 50s, having a big stereo system or a medium-sized stereo system was not very common for most people or most families. Most families had a radio. That's all they had. They had one radio, either a tabletop radio or a floor-standing console radio. That was what they had. That was like everyday Joe's thing. Hi-fi and audio and music systems back then in the 50s was like, it was for a selected few. But there was all these companies I'm talking about now are companies that made a change, and they made hi-fi and audio, mono, stereo, whatever it was, more mainstream, and they managed to create a market that was growing each year after year after year. It was growing and growing. And these are the companies, some of the companies, that paved the way for what we will later see in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and today. So Klipsch is absolutely a part of this list because, like I said, they made a handful of good products back then. And, I mean, they made some really killer stuff. Their corner horns are good, very, very high sensitivity, just the same as the Serene Vega 500 that I mentioned. Those two are kind of like in a class of their own. So yeah, Klipsch is absolutely on my list. It's not like I hate all models from Klipsch. It's not like I hate Klipsch as a company. I just feel that they have kind of like gone out of their way to make a few niche products and niche speakers that over the years have become misunderstood and highlighted by a few collectors as the total package when they're not. So my videos about them, where I talk a little bit negative about Klipsch, is based on more on the cult status and how the product's being portrayed and how it really is. So yeah, Klipsch has also absolutely some awesome sounding speakers in their arsenal and in their history. So they should absolutely be on this list. Now, the next company that I want to talk about that has made an impact on the world and made some really good products in that period is Acoustic Research, or AR, that is a short for many. Many people know them by AR. It was a company that really put out some killer good stuff, and they're even regarded to their old stuff today is highly collectible and highly sought after. And they made some good products. They made some good speakers. I have heard a few of them, and they sound absolutely great. So maybe not the most in your face, most recognizable brand by the mainstream or the masses of people, but among collectors and those who are a little bit invested in time and interest in the audio hobby or business or whatever, we or they or you, we know about the AR, the Acoustic Research. If you talk more to the wider base of people who are somewhat into stereo and audio, most of them will not. They might say, oh yeah, I've heard about it, but they don't know too much about it. So absolutely a brand that is worth looking for, and it's all about what kind of system you want to have and what type of sound you're looking for, what you're chasing. AR can be a good option. Now, the next one I can talk about is, there's 3 left here now. And the next one is Altec. And like I said, this is not like a ranking order. This is just random orders. Altec is a company that maybe have had the most influence on sound, audio, and audiophiles and everything that comes with it. They were a pioneer. They were they paved the way for everyone else. I mean, they came from Western Electric. There were some people who jumped off that thing, and they were started. And so if you want to talk about Western Electric, but Western Electric, it doesn't fit this bill because we're talking about 1950 to 1969. Western Electric was like in the 20s and 30s, and so it was natural for me to go with Altec because it kind of like it is like what it is, and the ties that they have. But the reason Altec is on this list is very easy and very simple. Great sounding speakers, innovative technology, innovative constructions. They affected almost each and every market, and well, they did cinema sound, they did pro audio sound, they ventured into some hi-fi and home audio. So they have done it all. Like some of these companies there, like Serene Vega did it, Tannoy have ventured out and done different things. Electrovoice, the same thing. So and Klipsch. So Altec is for many like the holy grail, and I can understand why. I am a big Altec fan. I like most Altec items and products, and I've been collecting them, and I've been selling a lot of stuff. I even bought a few years back. I bought out. It was a storage auction, and I probably told about this before, but the storage unit that I bought at auction belonged to the former owner of Altec when he moved from Anaheim to Oklahoma. He put everything he had. It was not just Altec, it was a lot of other stuff too. Everything in a storage unit. It was a huge storage unit. I went back and forth from Memphis to Oklahoma 6 times with truck and trailers to pick up everything. So, and there was like used and new in boxes, new and unused drivers, decals, all kinds of stuff, Altec stuff, and other things. So I bought that. So I hit the jackpot at one point when it came to Altec. But I always liked Altec. Their sound, I like their looks. I mean, yeah. As much as I'm a Serene Vega fan, I'm also an Electrovoice fan and an Altec fan. I like those 3 brands really much and a lot. So Altec should be on this list. It's just an automatic thing. Boom, they are in. Because this is like the birth thing of most home audio and home stereo period of time, and Altec is absolutely one of the pioneers and one of the driving forces behind that. So they are on the list. If you want Altec speakers and you want to buy it, be prepared to pay huge chunk of money for them. They're not going cheap, and rightfully so. They're worth every bit. So just be aware, if you want to buy Altec, you got to pay for it. The next on the list is JBL, and JBL is kind of like in the same boat as Altec and some of the other companies here. They made a wide range of products from home to studio to pro, commercial, stuff like that. So they had a huge range that when they hit the market. JBL has always been like a competitor to Serene Vega. Those two have been hitting butts all along because their two factories were it's not far away from each other, and they were like, "Oh, you sent a spy to my company, I sent a spy to." So there's a lot of jokes going around like that, and people who switched who used to work for JBL who started at Serene Vega or vice versa. There was a lot of things going on there, but JBL is absolutely a brand that should be on this list because they have had some influence on this market and the history of sound, and have been one of the parts that have kind of like formed what we have today, and they have made some killer stuff in the past. I mean, killer stuff. It wasn't like until the decline of other products in the mid to late 80s where you saw that the quality of products, especially the speakers for home, started to go down. And I don't think that they really never recovered. They make some decent stuff today, but not like they used to do back in the 50s and 60s. I mean, it was just killer stuff. When it comes to pricing, JBL is probably the most expensive speakers you can buy out there when it comes to the vintage ones. Hartsfelds, the Paragon, the list goes on and on. Of course, they have like other models that are more reasonably priced, but still, compared to other brands, you have to pay quite a bit more. So JBL is not the cheapest vintage brand to get. They cost a lot more than most others. Collectible value, yeah, they are absolutely worth listening to, but can you afford it? That's the thing. So JBL is absolutely a brand that should be on this list, and they are on this list. The last one I want to talk to about, it's not because they're the best. They're not. They're not the best of these. But they have such an influence on everything that have happened when it comes to sound. It started in the early 1920s, and they were a major player, a major force, a major contributor, paving the way, making things happen in the audio business until the late 70s. After that, things kind of like just, it was like you pulled the plug on the bucket and everything just became so bad. But we're talking about Jensen. And Jensen has been a big factor when it comes to not only building their own speakers and their own speaker line that sounded great. Their old hi-fi speakers are absolutely something you should listen to. Maybe not the most, if you're a bass man and you like huge heavy bass, they're probably not the brand for you, but they're very dynamic, they're very balanced, very good speakers, very good speakers. And they made some really cool looking speakers, very nice design. But where Jensen really excelled is they were like the daddy to most, because they made drivers for many of the other ones on this list. And many others that are not on this list. So Jensen drivers were used by many, and Jensen was heavily into raw speaker drivers. They were into hi-fi and home audio, but they were also into supporting musicians with drivers, guitar cabinets, guitar combos, you name it. They had a staple, and for decades they were reigning as the best until a couple other brands came on the market later on. like Celestion. But Jensen was absolutely one of the driving forces when it came to speaker technology. Like I said, it started in the early 1920s, and Mr. Jensen, who started it up in 1920, he had a vision and he had a plan, and he stuck to it, and he made it happen. And because of him, companies like Altec and JBL and Serene Vega and Bozak and Tannoy and Electrovoice and everyone I mentioned on this list had a blueprint to follow, because they had done it before. They were the driving force. And I want to say that if you put Jensen and Altec together, they are the kind of like, it's like a snow plow. You have a dump truck with a snow plow on it. Yeah, the snow plow would probably be Altec, and the engine would be Jensen. And then you have everyone else on the back of the dumpster truck, just riding along. Everyone else on this list was riding along, because those two companies really paved the way and made things happen. So that was the 1950 to 1969. I didn't include 1970 because there's a certain thing that happened in late 1969 or late 60s. Things starting to happen, but it didn't come to a blossomed flower until the 1970s or early 70s. But there were things starting up in the late 60s that really hit the market and really starting to hit home with people in the 1970s, 71, 72. And that's for my next list. So I can tell you right away that some of these companies and some of these brands are not on the next list because natural things happened. They got sold, they went out of business, stuff like that. Or better alternatives came along and that had a bigger impact than these. So this was 1950 to 1969, and the next one will be 1970 to 1990, and we'll take it from there. If you think this list was good in any way, if you think that these were the brands that would be on a list like this, let me know. I know there's a certain brands that people are going to say, oh, you didn't have this in there, or you didn't put these in there, and yeah, there's a reason for it. To be on this list, you kind of have to have more than just a good sound. They had to offer something more, and these brands did that. So yeah, there's a couple of brands that I left out. One of them is KLH, they're one of the first Henry Claus companies, because they were like on the market in 67, 68, 69, something like that. He left that, and they were probably on the market before that too, but he left KLH and he went into a venture with Advent, and that's for the next list. So there will be some Henry Claus things on the next list. But for the 50s and 60s, I did not include KLH because they didn't have enough to be on the list compared to these other ones. So until next time, take care.